Elara Hartley slammed the folder shut so hard the sound echoed across the quiet office. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the name printed on the wedding invitation she had just pulled from the file. Bride, Elara Wynne Hartley, her own name. Her hands trembled as she flipped the page again, hoping she had misread it. She hadn't. Below it was the groom's name, Adrian Vale, the billionaire who had hired her, the man who had been sitting across from her for weeks while she carefully planned the most personal wedding she had ever designed. Her throat went dry. "Why? Is my name on this?" she whispered to the empty room. The silence felt heavy. The invitation slipped from her fingers onto the desk, and suddenly every strange moment over the past 6 weeks began replaying in her mind. The way Adrian had looked at her, the way he had asked questions about the bride that sounded far too personal, the way his voice softened whenever he spoke about her. Elara pushed the chair back slowly. "No," she muttered. "No. That doesn't make sense." But deep down, something in her chest already knew the truth, and the truth terrified her, because if this was real, then Adrian Vale had been planning a wedding with her name on it long before she ever realized. But the story hadn't started there. It had started 14 months earlier, at the Aurelia Foundation charity ball. The ballroom had been overflowing with wealthy donors, investors, and celebrities. The air smelled like expensive perfume and polished marble. Elara had only attended because one of her clients insisted. She hated events like that. Too many people pretending. Too many smiles that weren't real. She had been walking past one of the tables when she suddenly stopped. The flower arrangement in the center looked terrible. The roses were crammed too tightly together, suffocating each other. Elara sighed. "Whoever arranged this clearly hates flowers," she murmured. Without thinking, she stepped closer and began adjusting the stems. She loosened the arrangement, separating the roses so they could breathe. Her fingers moved quickly, instinctively. "That's interesting." The voice behind her was calm and curious. Elara glanced over her shoulder. A tall man stood there, watching her. Dark suit, sharp posture. His expression looked mildly amused. "Is it?" she asked. He nodded toward the arrangement. "You just redesigned someone else's centerpiece." Elara shrugged. "It needed help." The man tilted his head. "You're not worried someone might notice?" She smiled faintly. "If they do, they'll thank me." For a moment, he simply studied her face. Then he said quietly, "Most people at this event are trying very hard to impress someone." Elara picked up a loose rose petal from the table. "I'm not most people." He let out a soft laugh. "No," he said. "You're definitely not." Only later did she realize who he was. Adrian Vale, the billionaire tech founder whose name appeared on half the buildings in the city. At the time, she had simply walked away. She never expected to see him again, but months later, a message arrived in her office. Private client, exclusive wedding project, budget unlimited. Client requested her personally. The contract alone was worth more than most weddings she had planned that year. Her assistant had looked stunned. "Elara, do you realize who this client is?" She had nodded slowly. Adrian Vale, which made the next meeting even stranger, because when he walked into her studio office, he behaved like a man who had never met her before. He extended his hand politely. "Ms. Hartley, thank you for taking this project." Elara shook his hand. "You're welcome." But she watched him carefully. Did he remember the gala? His expression gave nothing away. Adrian sat down across from her desk. "I want this wedding to feel honest," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Honest?" "Yes. That's not a word most clients use when planning a wedding." He smiled slightly. "Most weddings feel like performances." Elara studied him. "You don't want a performance?" "No." "What do you want?" He looked directly into her eyes. "I want the bride to feel safe." The answer surprised her. "Safe?" "Yes." He paused before adding quietly, "Safe enough to choose this life willingly." Something about the way he said it lingered in the room. Elara wrote a note on her tablet. "And what kind of ceremony are you imagining?" "Small?" "How small?" 40 guests. That alone was unusual for someone of his wealth. "Location? I own a property outside the city, Silverwood Manor." Elara nodded. "And the flowers?" Without hesitation, he answered, "Ivory garden roses." She looked up. "Any particular reason?" He hesitated. then said softly, "They're her favorite." Elara felt a strange flicker of curiosity. "You know her tastes very well." Adrian's gaze drifted toward the window. "Yes," he said quietly, "I do." Over the following weeks, their meetings became routine, but something about the project kept bothering her. Adrian insisted on approving every emotional detail: the aisle length, the music tempo, the lighting temperature. One afternoon, she asked, "Why does the aisle need to be shorter than standard?" Adrian leaned back slightly. "So she doesn't feel alone walking it." Elara blinked. That answer stayed with her long after the meeting ended because it didn't sound like the request of a distant groom. It sounded like someone who deeply understood the woman he was marrying. And yet, he never mentioned her name. Weeks passed. The tension between them slowly shifted. Their conversations grew longer. Sometimes they shared late dinners while reviewing plans. One night, he admitted something unexpected. "I play the piano badly." Elara laughed softly. "That's a very specific confession. I thought you should know." "Why?" "Because if the bride ever asks me to perform at the reception, she deserves a warning." Elara shook her head. "You're full of surprises, Mr. Vale." "Adrian," he corrected. She paused. "Adrian." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he asked quietly, "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you design weddings?" The question caught her off guard. She answered honestly, "Because I like helping people create moments that matter." He studied her expression. "And do you believe in those moments for yourself?" Elara hesitated. "My life isn't built around romance." "Why not?" "Because love shouldn't trap someone into a life they didn't choose." Adrian's eyes softened. "That's a powerful rule." "It's necessary." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "rules exist to protect us from things we're afraid of." Elara looked at him. "And what are you afraid of?" He didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was almost quiet. "Being loved for everything except who I actually am." If you're enjoying this story so far, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a like. It really helps more stories like this reach people who love emotional storytelling. Elara didn't realize it then, but that conversation was the beginning of something neither of them could control. And soon, everything between them would change. The confession lingered between them long after Adrian said it. "Being loved for everything except who I actually am." Elara leaned back in her chair slowly. "That sounds exhausting," she said. Adrian gave a quiet smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It is." Silence stretched across the room. Outside the windows of her studio, the city lights flickered to life as evening settled in. Elara closed the design folder in front of her. "Most people assume billionaires don't have problems like that," she said. Adrian chuckled softly. "Most people assume a lot of things." "Like what?" "That money solves loneliness." He glanced at the wedding sketches on the table. "It doesn't." Something about the honesty in his voice unsettled her. For weeks now, every meeting with Adrian had left her with the same strange feeling. He wasn't behaving like a man planning a wedding with excitement. He behaved like someone trying to understand something fragile, something he was afraid to break. And strangely, he always seemed most careful around her. That night, their meeting ran longer than usual. They ordered food and ate while reviewing venue layouts. At one point, Adrian reached across the table to move a seating card closer. His hand brushed the back of her chair. The contact was light, barely noticeable, but neither of them pulled away immediately. Elara felt the warmth of his hand through the fabric. Her heart skipped unexpectedly. Adrian noticed too. He slowly removed his hand and cleared his throat. "Sorry." "It's fine," she said quickly. They both returned to the documents, pretending nothing had happened, but the atmosphere in the room had changed. Over the next few weeks, the tension continued building. Small moments, quiet glances, conversations that drifted from wedding details into something more personal. One evening, while reviewing music options, Adrian asked suddenly, "Do you ever get tired of watching other people fall in love?" Elara looked up. "Why would I?" "Because you're always behind the scenes." She shrugged. "That doesn't bother me. But you're building emotional moments for strangers." "Yes, and never for yourself." Elara studied him carefully. "That's intentional." Adrian tilted his head. "You really believe love should never shape your life?" "I believe people should choose their lives first, and love second." "Yes." He leaned forward slightly. What if love is the choice? Elara didn't answer because she wasn't sure she liked where the conversation was heading. Before she could respond, thunder rumbled outside. Both of them glanced toward the windows. Dark storm clouds were rolling over the skyline. "Looks like we're about to get a serious storm," Adrian said. As if on cue, lightning flashed across the sky. Moments later, the lights inside the studio flickered. Then the entire building went dark. Elara sighed. "Well, that's inconvenient." Adrian stood up immediately. "Stay there." A few seconds later, he returned with several candles from the storage cabinet. Soon, soft candlelight filled the room. The flickering glow cast long shadows across the walls. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The atmosphere felt strangely intimate. Adrian sat back down across from her. "Power might be out for a while," he said. "That's fine," Elara replied. They sat quietly, listening to the rain slam against the windows. Then Adrian said softly, "I actually like this better." Elara raised an eyebrow. "Working by candlelight?" "No." He looked at her carefully. "This. What do you mean?" "The quiet." The rain grew heavier outside. For a long time they simply talked. About childhood, about expectations, about the strange weight that came with success. At one point, Adrian admitted something that surprised her. "When I was younger, I thought success would solve everything." "And did it?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "It solved the easy problems." "And the hard ones?" They got louder. Elara folded her hands on the table. "Loneliness?" "Yes." "Pressure?" "Yes." "And the constant feeling that everyone around you wants something?" Adrian nodded slowly. "Exactly." She studied him in the candlelight. For the first time, he didn't look like the powerful billionaire everyone feared. He looked like a man who had spent years carrying something heavy alone. At some point during the conversation, their chairs drifted closer together. Neither of them noticed when it happened, until suddenly their hands brushed across the table. This time, neither of them pulled away. Elara felt his fingers rest lightly against hers. Her heart began beating faster. Adrian looked down at their hands, then slowly back up at her. His voice was quiet. "Elara." The way he said her name made something inside her chest tighten. For a second, she thought he might say something else, something dangerous, something that would change everything. But instead, he stood up abruptly. "I should go," he said. Elara blinked. "So suddenly?" "The storm is getting worse." "That doesn't usually scare billionaires." He smiled faintly. "This one might." Before she could say anything else, he grabbed his coat. At the door, he paused. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to say something. Instead, he simply nodded. "Good night, Elara." Then he left. She sat there for a long time after the door closed, listening to the rain, trying to understand why her chest suddenly felt so tight. The next few days were strange. Adrian kept the meetings strictly professional again, shorter, more focused, as if the storm night had never happened. Elara told herself she preferred it that way, but part of her felt disappointed. Then one afternoon, everything changed. She had returned to the office late to retrieve fabric samples for the wedding decor. The building was quiet. Most employees had already gone home. As she walked past Adrian's conference room, she noticed the door was slightly open. Inside, several project folders were stacked on the table. She stepped inside absent-mindedly. "I should probably organize these before tomorrow," she murmured. As she sorted through them, one folder caught her attention. It was thicker than the others, and sealed with a gold ribbon. Curiosity tugged at her. "Elara, mind your business," she muttered to herself. But something about the folder felt different. Slowly, she untied the ribbon. Inside was a wedding invitation design. Her eyes scanned the page, then froze. "Bride, Elara Hartley." Her heart stopped. She flipped the page. "Groom, Adrian Vale." Her hands began shaking. "No, this has to be a mistake." But the next pages made it worse. Detailed sketches of a wedding dress, notes describing the bride's personality, her favorite flowers, ivory garden roses, even the aisle length she had questioned weeks ago. Every detail, every single detail, was built around her. Her mind raced, which meant Adrian hadn't just hired her to plan a wedding. He had hired her to plan their wedding. The door behind her opened. "Elara!" Her entire body froze. She turned slowly. Adrian stood in the doorway. His eyes dropped immediately to the open folder in her hands. The color drained from his face. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Elara whispered, "You were planning a wedding." Her voice trembled. "And the bride is me." Adrian didn't move, didn't deny it, didn't even look surprised. He just stood there quietly, and that silence told her everything. If this revelation shocked you the same way it shocked Elara, drop a comment below and tell me what you would do in her place. Would you run, or would you stay to hear the truth? Because what Adrian said next would change everything she thought she knew about him, and the truth behind the wedding he built was far more complicated than she ever imagined. Adrian didn't move. The rain from earlier had stopped, but the silence in the room felt heavier than the storm. Elara held the folder tightly in her hands. Her voice shook. "You were planning a wedding." She lifted the invitation. "And the bride is me." Adrian slowly closed the door behind him. The quiet click echoed in the room. For a long moment he simply looked at her, not angry, not defensive, just tired, like someone who had been expecting this moment eventually. Elara's chest rose and fell quickly. "Say something." Adrian walked toward the table and stopped a few feet away. "I was hoping you wouldn't find that yet." Her eyes widened. "Yet?" "Yes." "Adrian," she said sharply, "why is my name on a wedding invitation you never told me about?" He took a slow breath. "Because the truth is complicated." Elara laughed in disbelief. "You think?" She threw the folder onto the table. "You hired me to design a wedding. You sat across from me for weeks. You asked me to build the most personal ceremony imaginable." Her voice cracked. "And all this time you were planning for me to be the bride?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "I wasn't forcing you." "Oh, really?" "Yes." She pointed at the invitation. "This looks pretty planned to me." Adrian's voice remained calm, but there was tension behind it. "I never intended for you to feel cornered." "Then what exactly did you intend?" He hesitated. Then he walked closer to the table. "When we met at the Aurelia ball, you didn't know who I was." Elara frowned. "I figured that out later. But in that moment, you treated me like a normal person." "So?" "So that never happens." She crossed her arms. "That's not a reason to secretly plan a wedding." "I know." "Then explain it." Adrian rubbed the back of his neck. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely nervous. "I spent months trying to figure out how to approach you." Elara stared at him. "You could have started with hello." He gave a faint smile. "I did. That was before you hired me." "Yes." "So what happened after that?" Adrian looked at the invitation on the table. "I realized something." "What?" "That if I told you the truth immediately, you'd walk away." Elara opened her mouth to protest, then stopped because part of her knew he was right. Adrian continued quietly. "You have rules about love." "Yes." "Very strong ones." "They exist for a reason." "I know." He looked directly into her eyes, and I respected that. Elara shook her head. "You respected it by secretly building a wedding around me?" "No." "Then what was this?" Adrian picked up the invitation slowly. "This was never meant to trap you." "Then what was it meant to do?" His voice dropped to a near whisper. "It was meant to give you time." "Time for what?" "For you to know me." Elara blinked. "What?" Adrian placed the invitation back on the table. "I knew if I approached you like every other man with money and influence, you would leave immediately." "That's not necessarily true." "Yes, it is." She didn't argue. Because again, he was right. Adrian continued. "So I created a project that would allow us to spend time together." Elara's mind struggled to process his words. "You hired me just to spend time with me?" "Yes." "That's insane." "Probably." "Adrian, this is not normal behavior." "I'm aware." She paced across the room, running a hand through her hair. "You should have told me." "I know." "Instead, you built an entire wedding plan." "Yes." "And included my name." "Yes." Her voice softened slightly. "Why?" Adrian didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a vulnerability she had never heard before. "Because you were always the only bride." The words hung in the air. Elara felt her chest tighten. "That's not fair," she whispered. "I never meant for it to be." "Adrian." "I wasn't writing your future," he said gently. I was hoping you might choose it. She stared at him. Choose it? Yes. That's a lot of pressure. It wasn't supposed to be. Then what was it? Adrian walked to the window. For a moment he looked out at the dark city skyline. Then he said quietly, I wrote you a letter. Elara frowned. A letter? He nodded. It's in that folder. Her hands moved slowly as she flipped through the pages. Eventually she found it. A folded sheet of paper, her name, written on the front. Her fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. The room was silent except for the faint rustle of paper. She began reading. And as she read, Adrian spoke softly. I didn't write that letter to change your answer. Her eyes moved across the page. I wrote it because you once told me you value honesty. Elara swallowed hard. Adrian continued, I wanted you to understand why I built this. Her voice was barely audible as she read one line aloud. You said you built a reason for me to stay long enough to know you. Yes. She lowered the letter slowly. You really believed that was the only way? Adrian turned back toward her. I believed it was the only way you wouldn't run before giving me a chance. Elara looked down at the invitation again, then back at him. And what if I still run? His answer came without hesitation. Then I'll respect that. Her eyes searched his face. You wouldn't fight it? No. Why not? Because the entire point of this was choice. Silence filled the room again. Elara's mind raced. She thought about the last 6 weeks, the conversations, the quiet respect Adrian had always shown, the way he never pushed, never crossed a line. Even on the storm night, he had stepped away. He had given her space. Her voice softened. All those questions you asked about the bride. Yes. You were describing me. Yes. You knew exactly what would make me comfortable. I paid attention. Elara laughed quietly. That's either incredibly romantic or incredibly ridiculous. Adrian smiled faintly. Maybe both.
She looked at the invitation again, then at the letter, then back at him. You really expected me to walk down that aisle? No? What? I hoped you might. And if I didn't, then the wedding would never happen. Elara took a slow breath. Her heart was pounding. You built an entire ceremony that might never exist. Yes. Why would you risk that? Adrian's answer was simple. Because you were worth the risk. Elara closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, her voice was steadier. If I ever walked down that aisle, Adrian waited. It would be because I chose to. His expression softened. I know. Not because you built a beautiful trap. I understand. Not because you planned everything perfectly. I wouldn't want that. She looked directly into his eyes. It would be because I want to stand beside you. Adrian's voice was almost a whisper. That's the only reason I would ever want. Another long silence followed, but this one felt different, lighter, like something unspoken had finally been released. Weeks later, Silverwood Manor was filled with quiet anticipation. The ceremony was exactly as Elara had designed it. Small, intimate, 40 guests. Ivory garden roses lined the aisle. Adrian stood at the front, his hands clasped tightly. He looked calmer than usual, but anyone who knew him well could see the tension in his shoulders, because he had no idea what would happen next. Then the music started. Every head in the room turned. Elara appeared at the end of the aisle. The dress was simple, elegant, her expression calm but emotional. As she walked forward, Adrian's eyes never left her. When she reached him, she smiled softly. You look like you're about to face a board meeting, she whispered. He exhaled a nervous laugh. This feels harder. Why? Because this one actually matters. She squeezed his hand gently. That's the point. During the vows, Adrian spoke first. I spent most of my life building things I could control. His voice wavered slightly, but you taught me something important. Elara listened quietly. You taught me that love isn't something you control. He smiled at her. It's something you choose. Then Elara spoke. I used to believe love should never shape someone's life. She paused. But I learned something too. Adrian's eyes softened. What's that? She smiled. Sometimes the right person isn't a trap. He's a choice. The guests applauded softly as they exchanged rings. Later that evening, long after the ceremony ended, Adrian and Elara stood alone on the terrace. The gardens were quiet, the stars bright above them. Adrian looked at her gently. Do you regret it? Regret what? Not running away? Elara smiled. No. She slipped her hand into his. Do you regret building an entire wedding just to get my attention? Adrian laughed quietly. Absolutely not. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Good. Because sometimes the most unexpected love stories begin with the strangest plans, and sometimes the person you never planned to love becomes the only one you ever wanted. If this story touched your heart, make sure you subscribe to the channel, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. And tell me honestly, if you discovered a billionaire secretly planning a wedding with your name on the invitation, would you walk away? Or would you stay long enough to hear the truth?